This is the type of thing I wish we had a camera rolling for the last 10 minutes to show the viewers at home just how good things already are with Andrew and Jim, our special guest tonight, because it's a real fun time when a guest moments before says, wait, are we debating? What are we debating? But I'm thrilled to do the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. This is Common Threads. This is, without a doubt, the world's greatest political debate show that has the name Common Threads. We do this every Thursday, except for a couple of Thursdays there in December because we want a time off. But now we're back at it, folks. 2 guests, 1 hour-ish. Please sound off in the comments as always. I'm going to start with a few kind of housekeeping notes. Number one, Taylor, I don't know about you, I'm already ready for 2026 because the news has sucked the last 48 hours, so I'm already exhausted. But we are going to talk about some of the heavier stuff, but some additional context to it because you can't have a show like this without at least addressing some of it. But I promise you we're going to have a lot of fun as well. Number 2, January 2nd, the start of our new exclusive sponsorship with the great folks down in public. The studio audience just went wild. Scan there in the QR code to learn more. That takes you to public.com/CT. And we'll be learning a lot more about our sponsor throughout the show. Special shout out, of course, Taylor and Dan and Alexi and Chris and the whole team here at Common Threads. Hope everyone had a great New Year. Taylor, you had a good New Year?
Absolutely. Ready to get going.
Today is January 2nd. Today in history, no one knew I was doing this. These are fun. 1788, Georgia becomes the 4th state to ratify the U.S. Constitution. That was January 2nd. That came after Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Georgia's the 4th state. Georgia, however, currently losing by a lot to Notre Dame, at least by a good bit. Also today in history, 1811, Senator Timothy Pickering of Massachusetts becomes the first senator censured for revealing confidential documents of then President Thomas Jefferson. Big scandal. First time a sitting senator was censured. And finally, today in history, 1960, Senator John F. Kennedy announces his candidacy for the U.S. presidency. That was today in 1960. Let's bring in our guests because I want to know what they have to say about our today in history. We've got Jim Iuorio. Jim is host of Futures Edge Finance Unfiltered, also managing director at TJM Institutional Services. Thrilled to have him on the show. And also joining my old pal, Andrew Heaton, comedian, got that in there, host of The Political Orphanage, author of Tribalism is Dumb. Jim, Andrew, thank you fellas for being here. How we doing?
Pleasure to be here. Good to see you, Jim. Good to see you again, JD.
In a minute, Heaton. It's great to have both of you guys. So before we go to the topics at hand, any thoughts there with regards to the little bits of political today in history trivia we got? Listen, JD, I want to make sure we worked in the cross centuries. Heaton, take it.
As you know, I have been a Pickering defender for many, many years now, and I think he was unfairly censured by the United States Congress, and they should lift that ban.
I think that the Kennedys are awful people, and you just trace it back to Joe making his money. John F. Kennedy was relatively awful as well in his treatment of women. Just 3 years before he announced his presidency in 1957, he came out on the Senate floor talking about how he wanted to institute minimum wage laws to keep black people from competing for white people's jobs. Fact. And just not a huge fan of the Kennedy family at all. Ted Kennedy, come on. I wouldn't. He literally came to the trading floor once and was shaking everyone's hand. I'm not going to shake that murderous Venom's hand. There we go. I said that's the gauntlet has been thrown, Andrew. We are debating.
Wow. Am I the liberal? This is great.
Wait a second. I'm not a conservative. I am a logical, centrist, balanced thinker. Yeah. I think, at least that's what I'm going for. I'm right in the middle.
Okay, if you're a centrist, then I'll be the extremist. In that case, America should be a monarchy under RFK Jr.
We had it right the first time, says Heaton. Well, we're already off and rolling. See, this is the only time when I get to lean in to really obscure trivia history, things from presidential past, whatever it is, and just hope that I got 2 killer guests who are willing to take it and run with it. And that's exactly why I made that segment up today, and we've never done it before.
I do have some fun Kennedy trivia that we could do. He was friends with McCarthy. Like when you go back to the 60s, the Republican Democrat thing today, where it's really if you're a conservative, you're a Republican. If you're a liberal, you're a Democrat. That's kind of new. You go back to the 50s and the 60s, it didn't really mean anything because you could be a Republican like George Romney, who is a centrist, or you could be a Barry Goldwater conservative, like a libertarian plus nuclear bombs, or you could be a liberal like Nelson Rockefeller. It didn't mean anything. And so anti-communists were a really big caucus, and it was across party lines. Eugene McCarthy, the Red Scare guy, he dated not one, but two of Kennedy's sisters.
Wow.
Two of Kennedy's sisters that he dated.
Sure.
Kennedy was friends with the guy. He wasn't there the day they censured Joe McCarthy. He went, I've got a back problem. I can't come in. So he didn't vote on it.
Wow.
How do you approach the topic of trying to date the second sister? That's my question. Listen, I know you know me from all the other party events, family events that we've been hanging out with, but I thought maybe, just maybe you and I give this a go. Just to be a fly on the wall, I guess.
I was always working through her to get to you. That was what this is a long play. We all know you're the sister I wanted.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's killer context, guys, to kick off the show. Thank you. I knew I did not do that research for nothing ahead of time, right? There was always a reason to bring it in here. And I hear you. I think the jury's still out with regards to the validity of the censuring of then Senator Pickering, but I do appreciate a bit of support there. So obviously, so we kick off the show here with a good bit of fun, a good bit of energy, and we will revisit this. But of course, here, gentlemen, I think it is impossible in kind of a national moment like this, given how the year has started, to at least not just talk about some of the political conversations surrounding some of the tragedies already in the last couple of days, because they do impact the incoming administration, whether it's in things like law enforcement and national security, the tone and tenor, the role of the media, the more independent media, of which to some degree we're all a part of. It's a lot of what we're doing here on the show. I think Heaton is a professional in that as much as anyone out there. A lot of people yesterday jumping the gun a little bit with regards to the attack in New Orleans. Donald Trump, one of them, certainly not alone. In the immediate aftermath of that attack, before we really had the details, kind of fanning the flames of making this an issue of illegal immigration, illegal migration, because of an errant report from Fox News. This is the follow-up from a very viral tweet, which is also very wrong with regards to saying this has to do with people coming into this country illegally. Obviously, that is not the case. But I'm going to start off with Jim here. Jim, what's interesting to me is, at first I admit when I saw Trump's reaction, which is basically what you're seeing here, it's comparable. I admit that immediately I kind of clutched my pearls and I thought, isn't it so important to be a member of Congress, an incoming president, what have you, who waits for the facts to emerge, who isn't impulsive? And then I thought, well, Trump is not really known for specificity and getting the details right. It's more of the spirit that he's trying to communicate. And I think what he's kind of backtracked and defended since, I find myself kind of supporting, which is, all right, obviously this particular story is not one of illegal immigration, but it sort of goes on to underscore Trump's other many long-running points with regards to crime and safety in our American cities. Jim, how do you see the political dialogue that's kind of unfolded already in the wake of this tragedy the last 36 hours or so?
There's a couple things that jump out. First, it's not in anyone's best interest to listen to the rantings of politicians immediately after a massive story like this before. So I don't follow Donald Trump on Twitter. I have zero interest in what he has to say about these things. He probably knows as much about as the rest of us does. But now what you said, people jumping to conclusions on social media, like you can say, oh, that's an awful thing, but it is all we have now. It's literally, it is going forward, going to be the way. You have to find your credible sources on social media, because we relied on the legacy media for quite a long time. You just made mention of the fact that independent, smaller journalism is what's winning. It's what's winning because we are more credible and we are not bending at the whims of sponsors or overzealous producers who have political access to grind. Now, as far as like us all being like, is Joe Biden going to come out and say something? Who gives an honest shit? The only reason we listen for that is that, one, the left cringes like, I hope he doesn't screw up. And the right, myself included, if I'm in the right, like salivating like, oh, he's going to screw this up and we're going to give the big aha moment. Who benefits from that? I listened to his speech the next day, but I don't give a crap. But the real takeaway is that social media is the way to sort through these things. And you have to spend time to figure out who's credible and who isn't, and then form your opinion slowly. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Andrew, I don't know how easy that is to do, because all of us, I would say the three of us, are above average, obviously, news consumers. I say above average probably just in terms of the sheer volume of news that we read and we watch and we take in on a week-to-week basis. And we've been in different capacities. We've been in the political media game for a long time. I find it hard enough for myself to track what is real and what is not on social media, especially in an era where on Twitter X, now obviously the badge verification system has kind of changed. But Andrew, I wonder what you've kind of seen politically, either in the last few days or kind of more broadly, about the opportunities or maybe the challenges of safe, reputable reporting in times of crisis and its importance?
Well, I got two thoughts. The first thought is I do not like a habit that I have. I don't like what I'm about to say. When some horrible thing happens like this, where somebody runs through 12 people with a truck, or they blow up their car, or they shoot somebody on a baseball diamond, there's this moment where I read their identity and go, whew, it's not one of my guys. I don't like that at all. I don't think that's good for the country, for anybody. Us little people, I don't think it's good for us to figure out how to immediately weaponize something in order to score political points for whatever team we're on. So I don't like that element. That's why I try not to jump the gun on this stuff, just because I don't want to enter that headspace. Now, in terms of the due diligence that you can get from legacy media, I think I broadly agree with my colleague. I think legacy media has a real trust problem at the moment that is earned. I think that is a legitimate thing. The element that I would caution against, though, is I don't think the way to deal with that is to dive into social media. The problem that legacy media has is there's a lot of epistemological blind spots. There's lots of partisanship that goes on. I think a lot of the time it's just groupthink. I don't think it's necessarily conspiratorial, but if you get 8 people in a room, all of whom have broadly the same worldview, they're going to see the same elements and stories, and they're going to cater to that. So I think that is a big problem. The way to deal with that, though, I would not say is to go on social media and to just judge the veracity of anecdotes that pop up on it, purely because I don't think the way to deal with national policy is through anecdotal thinking. If you're going to do your due diligence, which by all means you should do, I would rather you look at math. I would rather you look at data and studies than just what pops up on social media, because that's going to be emblematic of what is angry, visceral, flashy, scary. And that's not how you should be trying to establish your own worldview. I want you and everybody listening to be calm, measured, rational when they're interpreting things.
2 things, and I basically agree with you. There's one thing I disagree with. I was 18-year veteran of legacy media, was on the inside. We can say that groupthink, and that's a big part of it too, but to not think that there's a nefarious policy ideological drive, I think is wrong. I witnessed it firsthand. But I like everything else you said, but I will ask you this question. What are you saying about social media? You're saying we shouldn't. You're not saying that we should be putting barriers on what people can see.
No, absolutely not. I do not think, for all of the misinformation and bots and propaganda and everything that goes on social media, the way to handle social media is not to have some sort of external authority clamp down on it and have some high priest who will, of course, always be pure as the driven snow, tell you what's factually accurate. No, that's not the way to do it. The way to handle bad stuff in any type of forum is to counter it with good stuff. So I'm no way. Yeah, I'm not saying censoring. I'm just making an epistemological statement that in terms of trying to figure out where we are in the world, don't be reacting to flashy things. Like here's maybe a more mundane example of this. I'm from Oklahoma. I should be way more worried about diabetes than sharks. Diabetes is so much more likely to kill me than sharks. Diabetes is so much more likely to kill me than terrorists are, right? But terrorists and sharks are more flashy. Now, should we be having a conversation about it? Yes. Should it be a part of our policy deliberations? Absolutely. What I'm saying is I don't think the way to orient yourself is to go on social media and react to it, because you're going to be led by the nose. And I want a nation of free thinkers, independent thinkers who are doing their own rational analysis rather than just reacting to people that game algorithms.
Amen.
But Jim, first of all, great, bravo. Okay, actually, let's do it this way because we had 2 great comments. First of all, Courtney's got a question here, Jim. It's very important. Love that we're freely cursing and drinking here. What wine are we sipping on, Jim?
This is it's a Sauvignon Blanc. It is one of the new wines I'm serving at my restaurant/bar in Palatine, Branson, Palatine. I cannot remember the name. When you have a good wine guy, you never remember names anymore because he delivers a case to the restaurant and delivers a case to my house, so I never have to shop for my own wine. That's one of the perks of owning a bar, JD. We talked about owning a bar before. My wine cave is stocked pretty well.
You don't have to remember the name of the wine as long as you remember the
I'll
name.
go down if you want to take a break. I'll go down. It's
Wine.
downstairs sitting in my kitchen.
And then a shout out here for Mr. Heaton. Andrew Stahlberger says, "Mighty Heaton, everyone should buy Laughter is Better Than Communism." That's a great.
Hey, wow, that's a deep cut. Thank you. That was I think my first book that came out. Laughter is Better Than Communism. It's funny. It has cartoons, a lot of political satire in it. Thank you. Hey, Jim, can I ask? Can you reveal the legacy media outlet that you were a part of?
Let's come back to that question.
It's cool if you got an NDA.
Most people know that I was watching. I don't like to mention them. They're litigious. I haven't decided how I want to go about some of the things before. But everybody who knows me, follows me on Twitter, knows who I was with for 18 years. JD knows. I'm just talking about
fair
it.
Enough.
He can say it if he wants.
Let me pose a secondary question. Then that's totally fair. I won't pry on that. The secondary question I have is, I think the main reason that political media has become so incredibly partisan is just incentives. I am an incentives thinker. And so I think that the incentive structure has changed, where if you go back to 1970, pre-1970, you had national news, but it was like 1 or 2 hours, and it was very, very broad because there were 3 channels, so none of them could risk alienating anybody. So they had to make it fairly tepid, fairly down the middle. Yes, there were power brokers, there were gatekeepers, and they were no doubt comporting it around their narrative. I don't doubt any of that. But it couldn't really become partisan because they couldn't risk losing people. Most of the news, though, was fairly local. And one of the benefits of local news is it's really mundane. And so when you're reading the Daily Oklahoman in 1960, yes, there will be the thing about escalations with Russia, but there'll also be questions about how this state should deal with water rights on a county by county basis. And it doesn't really get partisan. At some point, I think probably with the advent of cable television news, we moved into national media, and what plays at the national level is partisan things because we can have wedge issues. They're very electrifying. We can't just talk about county issues because we don't care about that if we're in a different part of the country. Is my analysis at all correct? And if so, what could we do to make the media ecosystem better? What would be the tangible solutions we could do that would restore trust in legacy media?
Easily. In the late 1990s, when we decided to be one of 2 countries in the world that allowed pharma to advertise directly to consumer, I, being the capitalist that I am, was saying, yes, of course, it's just capitalism. Guess what? It totally backfired. Do you want to venture a guess as to what level of sponsorship in mainstream media, the big outlets, of what pharma is in their sponsorship budget, how much of it is? Over 70%. Did you know that?
Really? No, I didn't.
70%. So now, okay, I'm going to get my tinfoil hat out of my drive. You're going to think, and let me tie this together before you dub me as a conspiracy theorist. So all you have to do is whiteboard where the money is going from. Pharma goes to television stations. Pharma goes to the WF. Pharma picks out candidates within government. It is not unreasonable to start connecting. I'm not saying it's true, but to start connecting these dots and believe in the existence of a deep state. It's literally right there in wire transfers as it goes back and forth. And I want to underscore the point again. I am not saying that I believe there's this deep state cabal that's controlling everything. I'm saying that to point a finger at someone who's trying to make that argument and say that they're this radical fringe lunatic conspiracy theorist, that is unreasonable because it is a perfect discussion to have about incentives. You show me the money, I'll show you the outcome. That's a Charlie Munger statement, Warren Buffett's right-hand man. So to me, it's a very, very interesting thing. And you rolled your eyes a little. I'm curious to think your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, so my 2 thoughts are, one, noting the incentive. So I worked in legacy media for like 4 or 5 years. I worked for a large cable television large cable television network that had a financial division. And I can just say from personal experience, in my experience, we were very worried about eyeballs. We were very worried about ratings. We never considered what sponsors were going to say. At no point on my show did we ever have a conversation about.
How long ago was that, Andrew?
This was from 2012 to 2017.
Well, I hope you're right, but it did not feel that way when I was there. Yeah.
I mean, like, I was also just a writer on the show. So like maybe there were backroom conversations, but in my experience, we were terrified of eyeballs. And that to me is the thing that media deals with all the time is we could not go on national television at prime time and go, hey, everybody, nothing happened today. Spend time with your families. Check in tomorrow. We're going to take a mulligan. No, we had to go, wow, Miley Cyrus rode a wrecking ball naked. People are freaking out on Twitter. This is real. This is don't go away. So we always had to pretend that like really important stuff was happening, even if it wasn't. But we never had. I never remember there being any type of coddling for the sponsor. That just wasn't my experience. Yours, it sounds like was very different. The thing I'll say of the deep state is I might go with you on that, but we have to define what we mean by deep state. On my show, The Political Orphanage, I had on Michael Glennon last year. Michael Glennon wrote a book on the national security apparatus. He would not call it the deep state. He made a very compelling argument, however, that in the same way that if we were to go back to ancient Rome and talk to a Roman in the time of Augustus, they would tell you that they have a republic, that Augustus is the head of the Senate, and the Senate has been what's empowered him. And it was really the sort of symbolic things. He made the argument of, we've got the judicial, the legislative, the executive. Those are the official ones, but there is a kind of ambiguous fourth branch of national security apparatus. He made a very compelling case. So if we're talking about like the civil service basically constitutes a fourth branch of government, or the national security basically constitutes a fourth branch, I'm there for that. If we mean that there's like a conspiracy of people in the back that are like, shot Kennedy, stuff like that, then we're getting into conspiracy territory, and we might have to smooth out the details more on what we mean by it.
It's funny that you come up with the Kennedy assassination as the conspiracy theorist, the point they're trying to make, considering that the intelligence community actually made up that expression, conspiracy theorist, to challenge anyone who was questioning the JFK assassination. But I will pose a question to you before, and you didn't mention the intelligence community one bit. But here's my question. Let's say the three of us are the head of intelligence, whether it be CIA, FBI in the United States of America. All of a sudden, it's however many years ago, 20 years ago, and Google comes out. So Google, the only thing that's ever lacked from a government trying to control its citizenry is the ability to surveil, the ability to collect data, right? So let's say that Google comes out and all of a sudden, wow, shit, they're great at collecting data on people. Wouldn't we be completely derelict to not try to get our tentacles into that big tech that's collecting data on people? I think if you were my assistant, and I'd probably be your assistant, you're a smart guy, but if you were my assistant and you said that's a bad idea, you'd be fired immediately for someone who would. I mean, Google's literally collecting the data. So I said this, I was at a dinner party with friends about a year ago, and they're in the tech field. And I just casually mentioned that, of course the CIA is involved with Google. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, what are you talking about? How could they not be? I mean, we're literally talking about TikTok, and we're going to be talking about this show. I saw it on the rundown. TikTok collecting our data in China, and our intelligence community saying, well, that's not fair. Yeah, no, because they want to collect it themselves.
But I don't think you even need to hypothesize, Jim. I mean, weren't the Twitter files fairly indicative of that, where it turns out that there was a cozy relationship? It's documented. We have it between national security apparatus and Facebook, where they'd come in and go, look, we really want you to not no vaccine skepticism. Be sure to. Yeah, so I don't even think you have to the idea that there's been involvement with the intelligence community and our telecommunications. I think is demonstrable. I don't push back on that too much.
Okay, perfect.
Listen, fellas, I hate to. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I hate to do this to two professionals when you're absolutely cooking and the two of you are cooking. I always like to say the greatest shows are the one where I just kind of like dial out, just like toss out a little topic, and then let the two of you take it, and I just sort of sit back. Before I know it, 8 minutes of my hour have gone by, and I'm still on the clock. So, but here's what we got to do. We got to take a quick break. When we get back, though, I just got to hear from our sponsors because we pay the bills. But also it's because Jim mentioned Charlie Munger, and of course we're going to talk investments here because they are our sponsor in the show. But real quick though, we got a lot of viewers right now on Twitter X, which is awesome. Just X. All right. I always call it Twitter.
Just hit 500.
Okay. Wow. 500.
X is a dumb name. Twitter's a better name. Twitter's a dumb name.
Thank you. I agree.
You don't get a letter.
Yeah,
you don't get to claim a letter.
You can't claim a letter. Didn't someone used to have, they would see, now we're going to get kicked off because I'm saying this. Didn't someone used to have like the @X Twitter handle and they booted them because they wanted it like for the,
Sounds right.
for the website?
Sounds right.
All right. Anyway, so listen, there's a lot of new people watching the show. I appreciate it. Chime in with your comments because we put your comments up on the screen. We want to hear from you as the conversation, as the good faith debate. And again, these guys are cooking. Jim, Andrew, you guys hang out 1 second. Let's talk investing. Say to the spot, God, because we've had Charlie Munger's name mentioned on the show. All right, folks, if you're serious about investing, like Charlie Munger, as are we as well, you need to know all about public.com. That's, of course, where you can invest in everything: stocks, options, bonds, crypto, you name it, they got it. Even offer some of the highest yields in the industry, like the bond accounts, 6% or higher yield that remains locked in even if the Fed cuts rates. Remember, the Fed's already cut rates a few times. Inflation might be a little too sticky for the Fed to keep cutting into 2025, but they are expecting at least 225 basis point cuts at some point in 2025 appropriately. What sets Public apart is how they give you the tools to make the informed investment decisions that you need to be a more informed investor. They have a built-in AI tool. It's called Alpha. It's absolutely awesome. It doesn't just tell you if an asset's moving, it tells you why an asset is moving. That's the biggest part for investing. You're like, why is Alphabet stock up 1.4% today? Well, this helps to tell you. You can totally understand what is driving the performance of your portfolio. Scan the QR code to learn more. Head on over to public.com/CT. And I mean, yes, obviously you're going to say something nice about the sponsor. Oh, see what I did there? About the sponsor, because they're sponsoring the show. I've been a long-time user of Public. Jim and I before in the show, we're talking all about like long calls and long put options and stuff. The options platform in particular on Public is absolutely awesome. I'm a huge fan. Check them out. All right, Andrew, Jim, let's bring that last conversation back home. Andrew, if you have, okay, wait, we got a question here. Lord Uncle Heaton, what is your stance on tribalism? That's just the whole question. Take that, answer that how you want to, buddy.
You know, it's funny. I actually wrote a book on this subject recently. I authored a book called Tribalism is Dumb. I'm fairly skeptical of tribalism. I think it is rife in current society. I think it's made us very stupid and very partisan, and we would be well to gird our loins against it. We can't inoculate ourselves to tribalism, but we can be aware of it and not openly inflame it.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah, Jim, listen, what are your thoughts on tribalism? I'm gonna kick this around to the whole panel.
Absolutely. I go back to the Groucho Marx comment. I don't want to be part of any club that would have someone like me as a member. Anytime I'm agreeing too much, like I supported Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump. I helped campaign for him. I have, people who are in his inner circle who are good friends. But now all of a sudden, when he says dumb things policy-wise, I have zero problem going after him. The notion of capping credit card fees or interest rates at 10%, that is an anti-capitalist idea. That is a terrible idea. We should never, those of us.
What if I want to deprive poor people of investments? What if I want to stop poor people from having credit? Then it's great, right?
Yeah, of course. Right. Exactly. So the whole thing, that is absolutely asinine. So the question about tribalism is that the second you become caught up in some ideology that cannot be questioned, then you really should take a step back and take a look at your life, because it's absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, join us in the middle in the Libertarian Party, which I'm not actually a member of, but I have libertarian views. And you said about politics changing, Andrew. Yeah, because the right was more liberal, meaning libertarian. Frederick Hayek's definition of liberal was libertarian, protector of individual liberties. And that was kind of what conservatism was. I don't know how that word's been hijacked, but anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I can tell you that. I had a guest on the Political Orphanage a couple of years ago, Hiram Lewis, who's done a lot of study on this, on like when left and right came in, when liberal and conservative came in. So you're right. Historically, liberal meant classical liberal, Hayek, Adam Smith, all of those guys, right? And generally in Europe, liberal still tends to mean that. Or even in the United Kingdom, the Liberal Party was the classical Liberal Party. You have that shift. The progressive label became unpopular in the 1920s or so, largely with the eugenics movement. And the term liberal and conservative was kind of up for grabs. FDR proclaimed himself as the liberal. And then that kind of became the big government thing. That's also when the left-right dichotomy enters the American lexicon. You will find zero reference to left or right in American political thinking until the 1920s at the earliest. You will not find any reference with Jefferson, Washington, Adams. It was not a part of the intellectual framework of the United States. It actually comes to us through the Soviet Union. Everybody knows it came with the French, right? The French had the left and the right and all that. It kind of dies out. Then when the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks are killing each other, American political reporting would refer to the so-called left wing and the so-called right wing of the Soviet Revolution. And it gradually crept into our political lexicon. And even then it was kind of up for grabs for a while, because there were people that were like, well, I'm a left winger if I oppose big government. And then it kind of consolidated around the 1950s. We've been using it since then. It's stupid.
Let me ask you both a question. So Heaton and or Jim. So if we go back to, we did our Today in History when we started the show here. If you go back to your days of the John Adamses of the world, they didn't have right versus left. They just simply, just like Federalist and anti-Federalist. Was there any kind of like smaller catch-all for the division? Because I do feel like it wasn't so much left versus small or left versus right. I feel like it was like, you're big and you're small. You're pro big government, you're pro small government, or like what? I got it.
I think the way I would recommend people look at it is think of political parties like grocery carts. When you think of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, don't think of like an Obi-Wan Kenobi Force ghost that reanimates through history, where there's like Republicans 400 years ago and like who would I have been? It changes all the time. It's changed in the last 5 years. Like Jim, the Republicans were free trade people 15 years ago, and now they're the protectionists. That's new. The Democrats were the protectionists.
I'd challenge that a tiny bit if you gave me a chance to.
Okay, well, how about this? There are things that the parties will pivot on.
There's no question. There's no question. Yes.
So they're baskets, right? The baskets have changed throughout history. I think when the country was very new, it was a lot more clique than party. I mean, we go back to like John Adams and that time. You're talking about a period where all of the presidential candidates knew all of the presidential electors by name and would go talk to them and try to win. So think of like a student council election. That's basically what we had at the beginning. The beginning of the Republic, President Washington held office hours because people just kept letting themselves into the White House to talk to him. So it was a very different time period. I'd say the initial ideological difference which existed in the United States at the beginning were two dueling strands of the Enlightenment. You had establishment people on one hand, like John Adams, who thought we need to have a more responsible, rationalist government of elites, but of course we should have elites and of course they should run stuff. And you had a more egalitarian, more knock down the establishment at all kind of thing with Thomas Jefferson. So you've got like Edmund Burke on one side, you've got Thomas Paine on the other. That was kind of the ideological precepts. And I do think they've changed.
But the gloves didn't come off, it didn't seem to me, till it was Newt Gingrich versus Clinton. That's when it became that it went from being everybody's got the greater good in mind to being contentious and trying to divide. Yes or no?
I think there's plenty of times in American history where we can say it was very contentious. I mean, there was a moment when a guy got beaten half to death on the floor of the Senate.
There was a beating.
Like in the 1960s, like there were routine political assassinations going on in the 1960s. So the idea that the 1990s are particularly unique, I think, is wrong to say. I think what I would say about the 1990s with Gingrich and with Clinton is that is the moment where we start to separate from having a previous model where Republicans and Democrats didn't really mean a whole lot. Like if I said I was an Oklahoma Democrat, that would mean something very different than if I were a New York Democrat or Republican. You really had a bunch of state parties that pretended to be a national party once every 4 years. The 1990s is when that starts to split. And if you're a conservative, you go Republican. And if you're a liberal, you go progressive. And then in terms of where the blame goes, I don't know. I will defer to you on that. I think that Gingrich was pretty nasty in a lot of ways. There were some things that I can understand him doing, but I think that kind of backfired at the same time. And so,
yeah, I think he was more to blame than Clinton for that.
Yeah,
I have no problem with, assessing the data and coming to a conclusion that it's against what I want it to be. Again, well, that goes back. We just did the full circle onto tribalism.
I agree.
Move on to beer.
I think Gingrich precipitated a lot of the issues, at least in the legislature. Like Gingrich, understandably, said we want our legislators to be at home in their district, listening to the people, not hanging out in Washington, D.C. I think that's a reasonable position to stake out. But part of the result of that is that they all quit being friends, so that you had a kind of atrophy and you had less bipartisanship after that. He was really, really nasty in his messaging. He did want to, he'd say things like, look, the Democratic Party is a bigger threat to the United States than the Soviet Union or the Nazis. That's a Gingrich quote.
Say, yeah.
And like that kind of stuff like does really atrophy the national mood.
I know you wanted to talk about economics and markets. Let's move to that.
No. Listen, once we got an atrophy of the national mood, that's like the cue that I was just waiting. I was like looking for my ends. Again, you guys have been cooking. This is awesome. Like I already know how the post-show rap's gonna go. We're gonna, we'll end the show, and then Taylor, Dan, and I are gonna sit there. Like, God damn.
Here's what I like. It sounds like Jim and I are arguing, but we're not.
We're not.
No, I know, but that's the beauty.
If you didn't speak English, you'd think we're fighting, but we're not fighting.
Yeah, right. If anyone's just like watching the show, but like on mute, and you're gonna walk by the TV, you're gonna say, "Oh my God, look at these two dudes going at it." What are they talking about? Oh,
also my face is bright red because the
Los personas blancos es furioso. Like if they don't, they don't know what
Yeah,
we're
I
saying.
get it. Well, by the way, though, so one quick historical note, because that's how we're doing it so far tonight. I believe you were both referencing the caning of Charles Sumner on the floor of the House, May 22nd, 1856. Thank you, Dan. To your point, and as he was kind of talking about the OG divisions, Representative Preston Brooks, a pro-slavery Democrat from South Carolina, used a walking cane to attack Senator Charles Sumner, an abolitionist Republican from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I had forgotten that detail. So that's a dude from the House walking through the rotunda over to the other side onto the Senate floor to make this attack. That's wild. All right. Well, that's, yeah. Wow, dude, this is how our team rolls. So that's obviously a depiction of how that whole thing went down. But I thought that was a good moment to pop in because we did have a reference to Bill Clinton. Do you want to do the Gore thing now? Or do you want to do the ad read? Oh, I got to check on my producers, folks. They call the shots. All right. Let's let cooler heads prevail here for a minute. Let me give one more plug here to the great folks over at Public. And then we'll continue this conversation. Folks, once again, if you're serious about investing, and I hope you are, because the bull market is off and roaring. Pay no attention to the moves in the markets like today and last week. It's the Santa Claus rally. Didn't really come. It's the whole thing. Overall, back-to-back years, S&P 500 up well more than 20%. Could it happen in 2025? If you want to get smarter about being an investor in the major market indexes, scan the QR code, public.com/CT. Everything you need to know to invest in stocks, options, bonds, and crypto. Some of the highest yields in the financial services industry, like the bonds account, 6% or higher yield that remains locked in at 6, even as the Fed continues to cut short-term interest rates. What sets Public apart from the rest is how they give you all the tools to make informed investment decisions, like the AI thing we talked about earlier. The AI tool called Alpha doesn't just tell you if something is moving, like an asset or a stock, it tells you why that stock is moving. That context is incredibly important so you can actually understand what is driving your portfolio's performance. Scan the QR code to learn more. Head on over to public.com/CT. We've also got a lot of viewers right now popping off on Twitter X. Please send us your comments in the last few bits of the show here as the conversation goes on. New year, new me, new stock options. I like that. Actually, so because we just did another thing, let me tee up Jim here. Jim, either your read on what investors should expect with a lot of uncertainty for a new administration with regards to the markets, Jim, or something that's kind of really excites you about how we finish 2024? Because, man, those year-end projections, Jim, for the markets this time last year, even the most bullish of optimists were off for where we finished the year for the S&P.
So I was pretty bullish on equities for all of 2024 for all the wrong reasons. I thought that we had a government that was spending like drunken sailors. I thought they were, blowing up M2 money supply. I thought that they were devaluing the dollar and people would flock to equities, and they did. So here's what for 2025. I think it's foolish to think that 2025 can be on par with 2023 and 2024 for a couple of reasons. One, the concentration in the Mag 7 is, to call it unprecedented, is mostly true. The valuations in those 7 companies are stretched, particularly look at NVIDIA too. So I think we're foolish to think that we can have an orderly rotation where people start to move out of those into the broad market and everything is going to be fine. That being said, I think the Federal Reserve is, by the way, these people who are watching who think this is what I do all day long. I've been in financial media forever too. I'm not just some guy. Again, I might be full of shit. I'm not saying I'm not, but this is supposed to be my core competency. So I think what we've learned in the last couple months is that the Federal Reserve is much more comfortable with the rate of inflation that's between 2.7 and 3, despite the fact that they keep telling us that they're angling for 2. Like, why the hell have they already they lowered rates by 100 basis points since September 18th? And by the way, 10-year yields in that same time have gone from 3.6% to 4.6%. They've shot higher. But anyway, with these higher yields, so this, I'm going to make it real quick about what I think the investment outlook for 2025 is. That so you have to look at why yields are going higher, not lower, in an easing cycle. One, is it because the Fed is comfortable with inflation? Probably yes. 2, are they saying Trump's the near-term policy effects of cutting taxes, cutting regulations is probably more inflationary? He plans on solving inflation with supply-side solutions. Those won't come around for at least another year. So I think 2026 could be the beneficiary of it. However, there's been things that have been underlooked for all of 2023 and 2024 that I think are the place to be right now. Again, I'm not giving advice, just telling you where I am. I'm looking to position more in crude oil, platinum, palladium, particularly those metals too, which are used in internal combustion engines. And remember, before everyone was going to be driving an EV. With Trump being elected, I don't think they have felt the full effect of this transformation from that nonsense of everybody's net neutral by net zero by 2030 or whatever those unrealistic goals were. So I think those two metals could do pretty well. Other than that, I probably like the broad S&P fine, but I think there could be a decent correction when we rotate out of the Mag 7.
Yeah, that's certainly been a big concern. Before we move on here, Andrew, not so much maybe I'm the true like financial services component about it, but being Andrew, the astute media. I had more of a Trump political question for you, but what I was going to ask you and weigh in on whichever one you want is that, I feel one of the funniest things about covering the Trump White House, like I did, was how frequently he would say, wow, you love your beautiful 401ks. Look how beautiful the markets are with me as your president. And the markets hit like all-time high after all-time high, basically for the next 4 years under Biden, notwithstanding 2022. Heaton, given a lot of the pressure points on the markets, what will you kind of be looking for in terms of how Trump may take something that maybe is objectively bad news, but I feel like this is an incoming president who just takes anything that's not good news and figures out a way to make it sound like it's good news. And I think that will largely extend to economic indicators.
Yeah, so two things. In terms of, Jim, I very much liked your analysis there of palladium and stocks. My equally good financial analysis is I have a lot of pogs and beanie babies that any minute, I'm going to put them in. They're in my IRA right now, which means they're shielded for taxes. So when I say
you're hitting on a really, really important point, jokingly, about liquidity in the market and it's showing up in weird places. But anyway, continue on. Yeah. Right.
Then in that case, that was brilliant satire on my part to drive that point home. Thank you, Jim. Yes, I am in agreement with you, JD. I think Trump is going to spend whatever comes down that's good as something he did. We're out of my element here in terms of assessing the presidential impact on markets. My broad interpretation is this: I think that when we're looking at unemployment rates, we're looking at employment rates and GDP growth, we're probably looking at long-term things that were either done by the prior president or by Congress. When we're looking at the stock market, whether it goes up or down in a day, that probably has more to do with the president, because the stock market has more to do with what we think the future dividends are going to be, and it involves spirit animals and all sorts of different things. So I think when you see the stock market go up, that might be more akin to what the active president's doing. When you're looking at broader, deeper economic indicators, those very likely are something their predecessor did, or something that's much larger in terms of global economy, supply chains, things of that nature.
I'll give you an 80% correct on that, I think. And again,
I'll take it because I don't know finance.
Just because, again, I'm wrong a lot. Just because I'm asked to speak on this shit, I'm never one to say, like, I met someone at a dinner party once and they were like, why should I listen to you? I'm like, I never tell you to listen to me. I don't give a shit if you listen to me or not. Someone asked me a question, I answered. However, I will say, so the last couple weeks, the stock market has traded nothing but sideways to weaker. The dollar has been going, wow, someone just mentioned the dollar, right? On cue. This is a professional. The dollar's been going through the roof, but I actually think that we should rename the dollar index more as the European Japanese stupidity index, because they're destroying their currencies at a greater rate. But I agree that the president, if they're speaking pro-business, if they're speaking deregulation, that should attract a lot of the global dollars. He's a long time ago, geez, that's a funny guy, right? But they are attracting global dollars because we are the world's tallest midget, whatever you want to call it. But when our competition is those other places are doing everything wrong, I'm particularly thinking about Europe, then we look pretty damn good. And I think part of that is the deregulatory rhetoric from the new administration.
Yeah, it could be. One of the most amazing infographics I've seen in the last 6 months, it's still blowing my mind, is when you take every independent European nation and you theoretically put it as an American state, where does it show up? And like all but 3 members of the EU would be 51 and down. Like Ireland would be doing well. They've got a good GDP. They've also got a tech sector because they lowered taxes and some other things. There's a couple of countries that are doing well, but most of them are really lagging behind the United States. And I think a lot of our understanding of America versus Europe comes from when I did a study abroad in Europe, as opposed to looking at economic indicators. And we end up going, Europe, sophisticated, scarves, tea. we like it. And it's like, okay, there's lots of good things about Europe, but their economy is really lagging compared to us.
No doubt. And someone smart said, and I've stolen it and pretending it's my own. Europe is a museum. China is a prison. Japan is an old folks' home. Where the hell are you going to send your money? You're going to send your money to the United States. So
that said, Jim, I'm going to key off of the prior comment, not the Tamagotchis, which I agree was very funny. Thanks, Brian. The one on when does the dollar get dumped for crypto? I don't know that will necessarily happen, but I am very worried about the national debt. I think that will eventually come home to roost. And when that happens, there's a high chance that we'll inflate our way out of it, because that would be the least ballsy thing for politicians to do to get around it. So at that point, first of all, do you think that'll happen? Do you think that we have a problem?
I think it'll happen. I think that it's happening right now. And the Fed actually told us for 10 years prior to the COVID stuff, they told us for 10 years how they so drastically wanted to spur inflation. I have like 20 different quotes from Federal Reserve members saying about how they needed to run inflation hot. And it's because of what you're saying. It's when, and again, for people watching who aren't in finance, the federal government, the 5 bad behaving states that are way in debt over their head, the only thing that can possibly save them is running inflation at about 3%, devaluing the dollar. It's called monetizing the debt. But embedded in that is they have to start acting properly in the meantime when they're given this opportunity to inflate their way out of their debt. The federal government, I think, is the only one who has an actual chance of doing that. And by the way, I think deficits are going to be higher, not lower, in 2025 because of tax cuts. Tax cuts as a revenue producer, we can argue back and forth whether that works or not. But one thing we can all agree on is if it works, it doesn't work in the first year. It starts working in year 2, year 3 of revenues starting to increase, which I personally believe they do, but I understand that's a debatable point. So I think we will run bigger deficits. I think that's one of the things the stock market is worried about. But I also think that people are going to buy our bonds if they believe that we're really deregulating and creating a more business-friendly environment. But that's maybe just a hopeful thought.
No, that's fair. I appreciate all that. And, I feel like the spoiler of fun. I feel like the referee. I got to throw the challenge flag and stop the momentum all the time. Quick housekeeping question, because we got a lot of people tuned into the show right now, and you guys are absolutely just jiving in the best way possible. Andrew Heaton, Jim Iuorio. Do you guys have hard outs at 8? Can you hang out a little bit longer?
Yeah, as long as you want. Me and my friends at my bar, they'll be fine. They serve beer there, so everyone's going to be good.
My laptop's on 39%, so I think I can probably stick around till 8:20.
Until about 8:20? Listen, we'll take it.
I'll just let you know when the thing's about to give out.
No.
But if it goes out immediately, just assume Jim offended me and I slammed it down in anger. Just make that assumption.
Correct. Goes, fuck Jim. This guy's terrible. No, you guys have been awesome this whole time. No, but just we'll just do this until that side of the screen just goes to dark dramatically. Right, yeah. And then it says executive produced by Dick Wolf, and that means that the end of Andrew Heaton's interview hour is here.
Perfect.
So we had the Clinton reference before, and this is the only time of the show that we've got a clip to toss to. So I guess we might as well do it. So the necessary context for this is that, and this kind of takes us to a pretty actually not dissimilar conversation that we're having. This is about the new look Congress. Today, all the new members of Congress are flying into DC. They've already gotten their office assignments and all that. January 6th. Not the big, coming up January 6th, of course, will be the certification. And this will be a pretty rare moment in American history when the loser of the presidential election will have to certify, in this case, that she lost. We did last see this. I think it's the last time we saw this. This would be January 5th, I believe, of 2001. This was then Vice President Al Gore after the whole messy Supreme Court back and forth. Take a look at how it went down there, as Al Gore had to certify the facts that the loser of the presidential election was Al Gore. Take a look.
I rise to object to the fraudulent 25 Florida electoral votes.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a member of the House and a senator?
The objection is in writing, and I don't care that it is not signed by a member of the Senate.
The chair will advise that the rules do care, and the signature.
I didn't see that earlier. That's good.
Mr. President, I am objecting to the idea that votes in Florida were not counted, and it's a sad day in America, Mr. President, when we can't find a senator to sign
the gentleman will suspend. The gentleman will suspend. The chair thanks the gentleman from Illinois, but hey, on the basis previously stated.
That's good. So for context there, for anyone who's like kind of remembering that whole happened, is basically got a handful of Democrats there, and they are so pro Al Gore that they're basically arguing with Al Gore, being like, you don't have to certify this right now. Like, we're gonna, because remember, we did have this with Republicans a few years ago. There were some, you have an opportunity. There is a good faith argument to be made to say maybe there's, other considerations we look at here. So a little more context on this here. Al Gore, like we just saw there, famously had to certify his own defeat. More than a dozen Democratic lawmakers formally objected to the certification of Florida's electoral votes. That's what we heard there. Former President Nixon, who was then vice president, also became a member of the club when he certified his loss. I think it's at least the fourth reference to JFK, but this did happen for Nixon. And then this one I did not know. Heaton, I'm going to start with you for any context on this. 8 years later, former VP Hubert Humphrey did not attend the certification of his own defeat. He instead left the Senate president pro tempore to announce that Humphrey had lost to Nixon. I know you love this stuff, Heaton. Where do you want to take this conversation? Because this is the position that unless she goes the Hubert Humphrey route, Vice President Kamala Harris is going to be in on Monday afternoon.
She better be in there Monday afternoon. One of the arguments that I think was that I agreed with the Democrats on in this election. I'm an independent. I share a lot of libertarian leanings like Jim. However, I do think the way that Donald Trump handled 2020 was reckless and horrible. And I think that not just January 6th, but more insidiously, the attempt to subvert that election through the judiciary precludes him from holding high office. That to me, there's things I'm optimistic about with the Trump administration. I hope it goes very well. I am rooting for him to have a good 4 years. I think that his behavior in 2020 precluded him from holding high office. And the Democrats were right about that. And for that reason, Kamala Harris sure better be in there agreeing that the count was legitimate and certifying it. Because if not, that would be an incredible kick in the face to all of the people like me that were pearl-clutching about that kind of thing.
So,
and she is, hats off to her for doing it. Like, to Kamala Harris's credit, who I do not think was a particularly good candidate, she did concede the election once it was called.
So, Jim, I mean, this to me, and Heaton brings up some outstanding points there. But this to me also kind of underscores and reminds me of just kind of maybe my own pearl clutching again during Biden's inauguration. I thought it was so wrong that Donald Trump did not, we're not talking certification specifically, but did not go to the inauguration. But then I got to work, and he might be watching, so I'm going to shout out with a guy I work with at the New York Stock Exchange named Chris Jordan. And he brings up an interesting point. He says, if you've spent this election in 2024 and you're making comparisons to Hitler and you're saying Donald Trump is a fascist, why would you? How could you go to the inauguration after you've thrown everything at this guy, that now you're going to stand there on ceremony and say, is again away from the certification conversation, but now stand there and say, well, the right thing to do is to stand here because of the peaceful transfer of power. And I do understand that argument, but Jim, your thoughts on either the VP certifying or more broadly, do you see a Harris? Do you see a Biden being out there on January 20th? I can't imagine they're not there, but obviously Trump didn't go 4 years ago.
I do. One thing we have to think about is that, like, we disagree, you and I, Andrew. Like, I think if there was ever a time where an election really potentially could have been fraudulent, remember the Democrats said in Florida too, I do think there should be very, very serious investigations into those things. And I'm not even sure they were. I weren't on the ground for that too. But the reality of it is that yes, he should be there. Yes, he should skip it. There's not easy solutions to these things. Yes, they called him a fascist, which was the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. Fascists, generally speaking, don't give money and guns back to the people that they govern. That's silly. But now we mentioned Nixon and Gore, which I think is an interesting corollary between both Nixon and Gore. They both may have lost elections because of bad makeup artists, which I think is very, very interesting. Look it up, people. It's a very interesting historical fact. Now, Al Gore definitely seemed like he was fine with losing the election, but he had to get on to more important things, was his love of polluting the economy by flying around in private jets. Election's all about how we should stop our carbon footprint. So that's fine too. He had other things to do. That being said, I think I agree with you, Andrew. I actually feel in some ways sorry for Kamala. I don't think she was the proper candidate. I don't know what calculus they went through to make her the candidate. Would have seemed like there was other people who were better equipped for it. So I almost feel sorry for it. But that being said, I think there will be absolutely no hiccups in any of this transfer.
If I could follow up briefly on that, you made a point, JD, earlier of the inauguration and the certification. I don't care if they're there for the inauguration. That's window dressing. That's rhetoric. What I care about is the certification. One of the things that bothers me about the presidency under every president of my lifetime is that the office has become a quasi-religious priesthood thing, where the president is the leader of the nation and our national chaplain, and we are electing a spirit animal. I have never voted for a spirit animal. I'm voting for the top bureaucrat. It's an important job. They don't run the country. They run the government. The country's much larger. So I would probably attend the inauguration because I am kind of a softie and I want to shake hands and get along with everybody. If they don't show up at the inauguration, it's not going to bother me. But the certification is part of the job.
Can I ask you a quick question, Andrew?
Yeah.
So, when you look at the history of our country, which seems like you do quite a bit, it seems to me that we were supposed to be, a confederation of nations, of states, independently run states. And we have gone so far away from that the president is viewed as like this spirit guide leader of our, he shouldn't just be that. And I think that states' rights should be a much bigger thing. And again, I live in Illinois, the most poorly run state probably in the country. And if we are going to lose, I want it to be losing quickly. I want people to leave. I don't want the federal government to be bailing us out. But my question to you is, do you believe we've gotten so far into this federalist mentality and lost sight of our roots, which were states?
Yes, I do agree with that. However, the way that I tend to phrase that is less, when we're talking about this issue of states' rights versus national, while I don't disagree with your analysis there, that obviously we're doing very differently than when the country was formed as a pact of states that were going to be the locus of government. I agree with that. The two things that I tend to think about are less whatever the original agreement was or whatever the will of the founders was. I'm not really concerned with executing somebody else's will. What I'm concerned about is scalability. And I think that scalability affects every other discipline that I'm aware of. If we go into engineering, you can't just make an airplane that's this big suddenly 14 times as large. There's going to be different vectors.
So like trade agreements and things like that is what you're alluding to, right?
Well, really, in terms of what I'm concerned with is when you look at like Europe, which I think is more of a functional federation. Like I think the right comparison for the United States is the European Union, where I want there to be, like the European Union, more variability between states. I would like Texas and Vermont to come up with radically different solutions to problems in much the same way that France and Denmark can pursue very differently. That's great. And I will steal good ideas from other states all the time, right? So I would like us to I'm less concerned with getting back to a founding document if the ideas don't work. What I'm concerned with is functional scalability. I think that government works well when it's smaller. I think that Europe's kind of a good example of that. All the states that all the countries that Bernie Sanders lusts after are Northern European countries that have like 3 to 8 million people in them. And I think you could probably have a more robust government in that kind of situation. I don't think government works really well with 330 million people. There are certain things I want the federal government to do. There's certain things I want the national government to do. I don't want to get rid of it, but I would like the bulk of day-to-day governance to be done at a more local level, at a state level.
JD,
are we too big? Can I? Yeah,
we agree on everything. This isn't as much fun. Go on, JD.
No, this is more fun because you're both like, you just like, it's I'm like watching two warriors.
This is great. You're getting like Oklahoma flavored libertarianism versus Chicago flavored libertarianism. Like Midwest versus Southwest. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, this is what the show's been missing though. I appreciate this because trust me, from being on this end of the table, and all of our producers would widely agree, we would far prefer this type of political conversation than we love our guests. We love our guests. I'm thankful to every guest who's been on the show. We've had shows genuinely devolve right off the rails.
Really?
Like within 30
people
seconds.
hate each other?
No, It gets so bad. And I'm like, all right, can we just like settle down here, please, for the love of God? This is far preferable. Okay, to some comments here. Politics hasn't been light and fun in so long. Thanks for this. Jim and Heaton, those are shouts out to you guys, man.
Thank you.
We got here, I'm full already, but dang, these two are cooking. Listen.
That's probably my sister.
We love that. Listen, after the holidays, I didn't think we can keep eating, but you guys are eating and you're also cooking up at the same time. So I very much appreciate that. What do you want? You want to hit the last one? Ish? All right, so we'll continue the conversation now with a little bit of a separate focus, which is the whole TikTok thing. All right. I don't know if we have the full headline that we could put up. It's very strange. Okay. Trump urges Supreme Court to pause TikTok ban. Too long didn't read. Trump, who's not president yet, I want to stress that, he is asking the U.S. Supreme Court, 1/3 of whom he put in the position for, to delay a law that would ban TikTok. Currently, the ban is set for conveniently January 19th, the day before he's set to become president. He, again, not a president, private citizen, is asking the Supreme Court to delay the implementation of a law because he basically wants to handle it himself. This is a conversation that gets into a lot of what we said earlier with regards to not just media distribution, but social media. I think very impactful to consider Trump's 180 on this issue, seeing as how the Trump campaign or any other candidate who has successfully used a platform like TikTok to their advantage to try and balance the dueling concerns, those concerns being China and the national security potential for threats on the one hand versus, oh, that was a really successful video and a lot of people liked it. Andrew Heaton, please remind me the degree to which you actively are a TikToker and your thoughts on how you see this playing out. There are a lot of TikToks right now being made about TikTok being banned. I just don't have a sense on how this one's going to play out.
I feel very strongly that TikTok is for twerking. I use it for twerking. I watch twerking. Correct. That's it. That's my involvement with it. Otherwise, I'm not.
Same for Jim. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not big on TikTok. Here's my jumbled thoughts on this particular issue. One, I think that Trump was very transactional with this. He was in favor of it until a donor stepped in and didn't want him to do it. I think it's fairly naked politics there on his end. I happen to agree with his current position on it, which is that the way you handle speech you're worried about is with more speech. I think from just an ideological position, if we're worried about China trying to subtly influence algorithms to rot the minds of the twerking youth, which I'm open to that being a concern. I don't think the way to do that is to remove the ability to speak for all the other Americans. I don't think that the way you settle issues of propaganda is by removing the ability to communicate for Americans. So I would have voted against this bill. I think it's a very bad thing. The one thing that could change my mind is if CFIUS said it was a national security threat. CFIUS, which is the Senate Investigation of Foreign Investment of the United States Committee. I think they do good work. I tend to be very skeptical of the government, but I think that CFIUS has a really good track record when you read their decisions of is a particular merger or acquisition of a foreign country of an American asset an actual threat to the national security of our nation. I think they're actually very rational, evidence-based, and sober in their analysis, and they're one of the few government agencies at this time that I just sort of trust until you prove otherwise. So if CFIUS were to say this is a serious concern, I would take that very seriously. Until that happens, I think we should err on the side of free speech rather than trying to stamp out nefarious foreign agents by removing speech.
No notes. Actually, a few notes. I always have notes, but I like that.
We almost got 10-10 no notes out of Jim. He's like, shit.
There's no way.
Here's some notes.
That's not going to stand. But for a moment, there was no notes. Okay, there's two things that stand out to me too. First, who the hell does Trump think he is urging the Supreme Court when he's not the president? That obviously is unacceptable. But two, however, the way the media always portrays this, it could just be Trump musings, which oftentimes they turn into like Donald Trump is demanding this. I have no problem with a private citizen saying, yeah, I think they should delay it until we can discuss it after I'm president. I don't think that's as bad as people make it sound. Now, as far as the actual threat of TikTok, I know we alluded to this earlier in the show. It's mind-boggling to me that we're like, oh, China's collecting our data. Yeah, you know what? The generation after me, and my generation probably included too, has completely given up our anonymity. Literally, we do, hey Siri, literally we do Alexa, whatever those things. Everybody's given up their anonymity. It's out there for everybody to see. The only thing that's ever stood in the way of governments to be able to fully control the populace is to be able to surveil. It exists now. I'm worried about our own government. Am I worried about China more? Yes, I'm worried about China more, but not as much as seems like other people are, because the disparity between the two is pretty narrow. Another thing that I'm worried about too is that, again, we know that our intelligence agencies have used media to try to collectively shape a public opinion on things or public narratives. I am uncomfortable with China having that power, if in fact they do, with their, feeding people. There was talk, I did read an article that perhaps they were big into the trans movement and they were trying to funnel different trans things to different kids. But at the end of the day, I agree with Andrew completely in that this is up to parents. I think if I had it to do over again, My kids wouldn't even have a smartphone until they were 16 years old. I think it's silly that these 12-year-olds are on TikTok where their parents can't observe and comment on the things they're seeing and consuming. I think
Jim,
it's fair. Andrew?
I follow John Haidt, and he's very concerned about social media on children. I believe Australia has just, I think, made it a law that minors can't use social media anymore. I could be wrong about that.
No, I think you're right, and I hate that law. But anyway, go. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to your position on this because I'm a bit divided. I am usually, as somebody with libertarian leanings, very much in favor of adults being able to do whatever they want. Minors aren't adults; they're not rational actors. They don't count as full citizens. So it's kind of fair game. So if there were a law that came out that said we're going to stop children from being on Facebook until age 18, would you support it?
No, I would vote against it. But if I lost that vote, I wouldn't be that upset because I do think the net outcome is good. You know, when in Illinois, it was a big thing a couple of years ago, the outlaw smoking in restaurants and bars. And I own a restaurant and bar in Illinois. It was just before I bought it. Like if I was sitting in the Illinois Congress, I would have to vote against that. People should have their own decisions what to do. That being said, I was glad as hell that it passed, and now I go to these restaurants with no smoke. So, but anyway, and you mentioned the minors, and we should be protecting minors, but I do think that should be part of the family. If the government wants to get involved, they should be sending out a message about the harms of letting youth on that. Like instead, like we said before, they're involved with technology, and everyone's supposed to have a smartphone because then you can connect with your students and you do group projects and all the bullshit, which is true. But there's a downside that comes with that too. So I would love for families to step up, and I would vote against that law. But if it passed, I'd say, thank God. Yeah.
Devil's advocate here. Let's combine these two. Let's say I, as a parent, allow my children at 12 years old to smoke cigarettes. Legal or illegal? Should that be the government or the parents making that decision?
Wow. This is the first time I'm actually going to lose a point solidly. Like this is a solid punch by you. I was just watching Hagler Hearns, the round one from the fight back in the 80s. And you just landed a nice Hearns punch because I will say, yeah, it should be against the law for kids to smoke cigarettes and drink. By the way, in Wisconsin, kids can drink if they're with their parents. By the way, I actually think that that's an excellent law because I think then at restaurants, the kids, you grow up associating alcohol with food more and things like that instead of just associating alcohol with getting bombed. But the cigarettes thing is an interesting point. I'll have to think about it. I'm not going to say you won. I'm just going to say you landed a nice punch.
And I'm only playing devil's advocate anyway.
No, I
don't know. I think I would make it illegal. I would make the cigarettes and the alcohol illegal. But the social media, I'd have to think about it. I'm kind of on the fence.
I mean, it's got to be illegal for parents to beat their kids. Any sort of massive corporal punishment. And I'm not against a quick spank, but obviously that can get to a point where that's completely not acceptable. And should a parent be cuffed and dragged away? Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how this actually plays out is really interesting because I remember, the original conversation on Trump and TikTok was this idea, and I don't really know how true it actually was in when it got executed. I remember Trump running for re-election 4 years ago, I guess now almost 5 years ago, and you had to, I think just because it was around COVID, you had to get a ticket ahead of time that you were going to go. You had to basically RSVP to show up to this Trump rally. It was in Ohio, I think, and a bunch of TikTokers allegedly flooded it. And with positive RSVP saying they were going to be there, and then none of them showed up. And so it was virtually an empty Trump rally. And that in Washington, that was the prevailing thought for a long time, that's what planted the seed in Donald Trump's true distaste. His
could easily be. Platform. He's a spiteful son of a bitch. Yeah.
Yeah. You have that punitive sense to him. And so it doesn't become very difficult to say, oh, well, if he feels slighted from this thing, then of course he's going to use the bully pulpit he has as president or as a candidate for president in that case. To try and crack down. And then this year, everything kind of changed. Everything shifted with the kind of independent / social media presidential election that this was. I think the advisement from some younger advisors around Donald Trump who said, hey, you got to go on the Joe Rogan podcast. You got to sit down with the Nelk boys, go meet with the UFC dudes, go make a TikTok and get it out. And then I think his team would come back and say, Mr. President, that TikTok had 74 million views. And he's sitting there saying, holy shit, I love TikTok. Let's bring back TikTok. But also to Heaton's point, the Susquehanna guy is a close advisor, owns 15% of ByteDance, the parent company. So yes, to Jim's way earlier point to take us back in, it's that follow the money, that whiteboard comment Jim made now almost an hour ago in the show, which is very true. Because I wondered to what degree that's
is all the different marketers who use domestic marketers who use TikTok as part of their business. It's been estimated that we lose $1 billion in revenue. So when we just, I don't know where that belongs, because perhaps they could switch over to YouTube Shorts, Instagram, something would step in to replace it. But I mean, it should be mentioned, is all I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And you're absolutely right. And obviously the platform has aggressively pushed this kind of idea of like a shop, or if you've got like whatever it is, 5,000, 10,000 followers, you could take advantage of certain type of advertising promotionals. And then of course, TikTok was also really funny. You remember during all the debates, especially at the Republican primary debates, like with Nikki Haley and DeSantis and all them were running against Trump, and Trump wasn't there. But during the debate nights, you'd go to a 2-minute commercial break, and like 60 seconds worth would be a pro TikTok ad. And they would be spotlighting small businesses and small business owners who have said, well, gosh darn, I never would have had the opportunity to, sell this or that or do all this wonderful stuff if it weren't for the love of TikTok. Or it's like, respectfully, it's someone who's sitting there being like, well, I'm never on TikTok, but my daughter started making me TikToks, and now I got 1 million orders for my fish hats that I make at home. Like those are the objective TikTok success stories. But I do sense the bipartisan condemnation or bipartisan concern over national security is it's going to be front and center for this Congress. Sure. Which, speaking of, let me end with this before we get to our last segment for both of you. Top things you think this Congress will take up. Obviously, tax is going to be up there. Immigration is going to be up there. But a very narrow lead here, Andrew Heaton, for what the new look Congress could take up starting, I guess, in theory, next week.
You're right. It's a very, very narrow lead. When you've got a Congress that has a narrow majority, that gives any ideological splinter group undue influence over that. So your Thomas Massey's or your Matt Gaetz type people, whoever is willing to be a thorn in the side is going to have a lot more influence because the majority is so narrow. What I would suggest to viewers is that the next 4 years are going to be mostly done in the next 100 days. From a presidential side of things, the president has maybe one big thing they can do. If they're an effective president, they can do one big thing while they're president. An incredibly effective president will maybe do two big things. And that's going to happen in the first 100 days. That's when they have the most political capital, and that's going to be exercised. So 100 days from January 19th, whatever the inauguration is, that's going to be where the really big stuff goes down. And I think that the biggest priorities are going to be, just as you said, JD, it's going to be immigration and the tax cuts.
So what's budget reconciliation here, Jim? I mean, not to get too wonky, but like I feel like such a nerd because every week on this show I talk about budget reconciliation, and I can feel viewers at home saying, "Shut the fuck up! What are you talking about? Who cares about what that is?" But I do think as a procedural mechanism, it's really important to understand. Like we kind of changed the rules of the game, and we now allow very teeny tiny majorities in Congress to do things that they're actually not designed to do. We're not supposed to pass legislation with 50+1, but here we are, Jim.
No, I know, but the budget resolution stuff. So if the government shuts down, who gives an honest shit? It's literally when you do the calculation of the federal government shutting down. So it's 16% of the federal government, which is also like 1/5 of general government when you count state, county, local municipalities. So we're talking about 2 to 3% of the government. Now, the only reason Barack Obama shut down all the national parks, which they weren't part of the shutdown, he just realized that, oh shit, we're going to shut down the national government and nobody's going to notice. I better do something to make them notice. That being said, Donald Trump wanting to remove the debt ceiling, I think he knows what I kind of said earlier, in that these tax cuts, if he gets something, which by the way, I think the low-hanging fruit on what he's going to do right away is immigration. I think that's the one thing that'll be easiest to do and that everybody agrees on. But the second low-hanging fruit perhaps is tax cuts and deregulation. And if that happens, deficits are going to blow up. Of course, he wants the debt ceiling raised for 2025 because it could be a big thing. Trump was a very profligate spender back when he was president. Now, he wasn't a profligate spender when CPI was running at 3%. At the time, we were worried a little bit about disinflation. I'm hoping he's smart enough to understand the disparity between the two situations, but I'm not 100% confident of it.
I disagree with you insofar as that I don't think that first bite of the budget reconciliation apple is going to be immigration push come to shove. I think it is tax or like a border/energy production bill, which they've talked about. I think it's tax cuts. I think the Larry Kudlows of the world, I think his economic advisors from the first time that helped him change the tax code in 2017, the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they're called. Right. That contingency in Trump's ear, even if it's not the exact same economic advisors, but people like Kevin Hassett are back. People like Kevin Hassett are back again for round 2 this time. Those are the architects the first time. Those are the ones who are going to say, hey, you want to, they're going to frame it like, you want to unleash the beast the animal spirits of the great American financial markets. Cut taxes. It's going to be a beautiful thing. I expect that would be my personal prediction for what gets
By the way,
used
saying that,
first.
do you know of my relationship with Larry Kudlow or no?
I have no idea.
Oh, that's
Yes,
funny.
Dave,
Yeah, I know,
are you
because
dating?
he and I have been close, and we've been close friends for 20 years. It's funny that you say that, but I agree, and I tell him to his face that he's too gung-ho and let's unpop the champagne bottle. I think, I think discretion can often be the better part of valor. I think they're right, but I think disrupting things too quickly in the short term can be not great, and I think it can blow up deficits, as I said before.
Totally.
I
Yeah, go for it before we get to the end here.
Sure, I got a comment and a question. The comment is, I care about the government shutting down. The reason that I care about shutting down is multifold. The main one is it doesn't accomplish anything, and we end up spending more money than we would have if we hadn't done it, because we end up back paying everybody that was furloughed while they're there. The federal employees go effectively on like a weird vacation where they're not paid, but they will be paid, and then they get paid. It ends up being a big hassle that accomplishes nothing other than possibly weakening our credit rating in terms of international bond markets. And then the other kind of long-term thing is, as a guy that wants a small government, I want a tiny government. I don't like that. I don't like prolonged gridlock, and I don't like prolonged dysfunction, because I think at some point people go, well, this is all a bunch of bullshit. Let's just get somebody in there to break some heads. I don't want that. I don't want anybody coming in to break skulls. I want it to be.
But finally, we do genuinely disagree on something, because I've somewhat liked gridlock in the past. I always think that one thing that scares me is that the Republicans have all three houses. I like when they can't get shit done, but that's me, because I'm beyond cynical. Yeah.
I would normally want some gridlock. I don't like, I want there to be some drag and inertia. I think you can have too much. And I think that's where we are, where the government is not just dysfunctional, but incapable of doing basically anything.
Perfectly.
And I want there to be a little bit of lubrication there. The question I have for you, Jim, is this. I, as a very big debt hawk, very big deficit hawk, I'm very concerned about this. So for this reason, despite being a tiny limited government guy, I am not in favor of tax cuts unless you can absolutely convince me that they're going to be debt neutral. Do you think the Trump tax cut, if reauthorized, would actually grow the economy fast enough to lower the deficit?
I am 100% convinced that the answer to that is yes. Now, it takes a little bit of time to do that. When you're in a situation now where the average relatively high earner is taxed over 50% of their income, and this is, again, people like 50%, the federal tax rate is, I'm talking about tax burden. When you're talking about a tax burden as heavy as it is now, it is not unreasonable to think that is an impediment to real live good economic growth, particularly in the corporate sector too. So I think, in my mind, there is no question. Now, to convince people that it's a leap of faith, you can't prove the counterfactual. Like when taxes were lowered in 2017, we started collecting more taxes into 2019. Not enough to have justified it yet, but 2020 was 2.5 years after the tax cuts were put in place. That, to me, is when it's generally supposed to show up. And we obviously had an exogenous factor that crushed whatever was going on. So yes, I do believe that the only way to get things going and to raise revenue and cut the deficit and the debt is to lower taxes, but way more importantly is to lower regulation. Just look at fuel, look at beef, cattle ranchers and drillers. All the government does is create inflationary regulations that is absolutely try to stomp them into the ground. They actually made it a point of saying they wanted to stomp both those industries into the ground, two of the most important industries we have. Lowering taxes and regulation in those two fields from a supply side standpoint could actually address inflation. By the way, it's the only way. When you got those MMT idiots, the modern monetary theory people saying, no, we're fine, we can just keep running up debt, we have so many assets. Great, if you're right. But when you are wrong, it happens too quickly to rectify the situation. When you have a currency crisis or a debt crisis, which I don't believe we're that close to, but I think we're heading toward the rocks. But when that happens in Caracas, Venezuela, guess what? The cat population and the rat population disappeared because they became food sources during a currency crisis. It's the worst possible economic crisis. So I am worried very much about the debt and deficits, but I'm on the opposite side as you. I think deregulation and cutting taxes is the only way to get to a good spot.
So I'm gonna use my rare host of the show card, and it's like a Monopoly game. It's like So first of all, Jim, now I'm going to get you and Stephanie Kilton on the show one-on-one for a special financial edition.
I called her the Oppenheimer of our time.
Well, and I think and I'm not saying I entirely agree, but for how much I have studied it in terms of deficit, I think what they would argue is they say a credit crisis, the likes of which happened in Venezuela, cannot happen here because, among other factors, because what?
We're the world's reserve currency.
We are the world's reserve currency. We also have an independent central bank. That's what underscores the key difference. That was loud. An independent that can manipulate interest rates completely free.
Something wrong.
Completely free of political pressure. The idea being, or they would also say, you know, what happens in Greece can't exactly happen here because they're subject to the entire whims of the Eurozone, which Heaton was talking about earlier. And we do have the globe's dominant reserve currency that can make decisions for us. And we're not contingent like Greece is to look around at all their neighbors and like, shit, we're in a credit crisis. But the ECB can't lower rates for all those other countries.
I disagree with both of you. I think that we can absolutely have a credit crisis. The modern monetary people, I agree with Jim on that bit. I think there's like 5 people in the entire country that can actually explain what modern monetary theory is. It's used as a magic wand by people that don't know economics. You go, but MMT. So I think that the way out would be hyperinflation. That could occur. That would probably occur. Where I disagree with Jim, and I'm glad we finally came up with something to fight with, is I would love it if we could merely grow our way out of the deficit. I think that the amount of year-over-year economic growth that would be required to accomplish that is something that even Reagan didn't pull off, and he tried really hard. The likelihood that we would have year-over-year economic growth high enough to pull us out of that pit is not going to happen, which means there's going to be some amount of... I think your opinion there
is very reasonable, but I just don't agree with it.
Yeah.
I think no one ever talks about cutting spending, so the only thing is left.
What I would do is I would go back to the Gang of 8 and say, let's do $2 spending cuts, $1 tax increases.
I'm 100% on board with that.
Yeah, okay. Wait, we can't. Damn it, JD, I was really trying to fight him. But yeah, I
know you guys are just like every time you try to do battle, you're like,
good try. I get to the point where I don't think we get it. Like the grow our way out of it is a really I want to keep growing, and obviously growth is a part of this, but I don't think we can just do that. I think it's going to involve some amount of spending cuts and tax incrises, and it's better to do it now.
Don't disagree then. I just want someone to mention spending cuts. I want someone to say it. I know that Elon and Vivek have said it, but I don't know that I believe it necessarily. Words are nothing. Let's see you actually cut spending.
Yeah, and then the question comes down to obviously they're going to be debating this. What do you cut spending on, right? Because earmarks and pork aside, I don't get the sense there's a big
bad
conservative.
News on that one too, by the way. The really bad news on the spending cuts bit is if you agree with me and Jim that we're spending too much money and we're doing it on deficit, we don't have it. You don't get out of this without touching entitlements. Like I would cut back the military a lot. I would cut back the military considerably. It's not that big compared to Social Security.
I was going to say
DOD
versus Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Yeah, that's a third rail of this whole one, right? And that was
you don't get elected if you say that, but it's unfortunate because we need to do it.
Yeah.
And obviously that was the albatross that Democrats tried to use against Republicans, and Donald Trump deflected it enough, obviously, to go 7 for 7 in the swing states. It wasn't a whole thing. Which made fun of my comment for calling it.
Smart guy. Follows me on Twitter. We talk all the time. He's really a bright guy.
Nice. Shout out to Widge. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you for that, Widge. Actually, I'd love to hear more from Widge here at some point, but we're about to wrap up the show. So I hope Widge tunes back in and we could have that independent Fed conversation, because I would love to have that one big time for sure. Especially as there's a lot of pearl clutching with people being like, oh my God, Donald Trump said, what about Jerome Powell? These are separate entities, sir. Okay, final comment here, but why cut spending other than spend less money? What does that accomplish other than lowering rates?
Yeah.
If you want to, before we wrap, go ahead. Finally here, Andrew, go for it.
There's 2 reasons that spending cuts are good, right? One is we're spending too much, and it's going to get us in trouble. There's going to be a point in the future where creditors go, I don't think you can pay me back, and they're not going to buy our stuff on credit. And at that point, either we just stop deficit spending and do draconian cuts in terms of Social Security, Medicare, pull out of every country, leave astronauts to die in space, not fun, or we do hyperinflation, right? So you got to do spending. The other reason is this. Look, I'm all for taking care of people. I'm in favor of social safety nets. What I'm not in favor of is ineffective spending. And there's lots of ineffective spending. If it's just dumb spending that doesn't need to be done, or it's redundant, or it's counterproductive, that's money that would do better just writing a check to poor people or giving it back to people in terms of tax rebates to grow the economy. That's money that would be better spent to help everybody if it's not being spent on something dumb.
I can finally say it. No notes.
No notes. He goes, no notes, but
No.
No. Okay, we're good.
At the bar.
All right, fellas. So this is the fan favorite segment. Our millions of viewers who have tuned into the show since we launched 4 months ago. This is what they keep coming back to. This is what it's all about here, fellas. The opportunity to show at long last to put our political heated divisions aside and to say something nice.
Say something
nice.
Things about each
Did
other.
that error? Did that
do we-
graphic error, Taylor? Yeah. We got it. All right, we're back now. Yes, I thought we had it. We were pausing for a graphic there. So Andrew and Jim, obviously the spirit of the show here that we try and do, although you guys have just absolutely crushed it, 10 out of 10 across the board, has been to try and find the things that unite us more than that divide us. And so, although I think maybe politically the two of you may not be too far apart from one another, I've really enjoyed this. You both made me into a libertarian tonight for sure. We like to say something nice about the other side, but Jim, I'm going to start with you here. Give me something nice, kind of about either those politicians, those voters who don't see things the way that you see in an effort with this new Congress, a new president coming back to find some common ground.
I'll say some nice things about the left's policy over the last, call it 16 years. Okay, Barack Obama, limiting drilling on federal lands and forcing fossil fuel companies to become more efficient, I think worked wonderfully. But passing gay marriage, I don't know why it was silly that we opposed that for so long. Now, when I get to the Biden administration, I don't have much that I can compliment. If the CHIPS Act worked out, but it's still, it's obviously a work in progress, and much of that money has not been put to good use yet. So I have very little right now to say left. As far as you guys go, we're libertarian. I think this conversation is fun as hell. I could talk about this. If my wine bottle was still here, I wouldn't even want to go right now. I just left it down in the kitchen. But you guys are wonderful to talk to. And Andrew, I think it was just so nice to talk to you. And I think you have great opinions.
That was awesome. Andrew, go for it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't like or respect Jim, but I do agree with most of what he said. So I want to be very clear on that.
Seems like a logical conclusion.
Because I have to get that bar, but even if we agree on a lot, I want people to know that the character attack is there. He's a horrible, horrible person.
I don't have a nose like this for making people like me too much.
In terms of saying nice things, I like where your head's at, JD. Since there is a lot of ideological overlap and analytical overlap today, let me say something legitimately nice about people that I disagree with. I tend to take a classical liberal perspective. I want a functional but small government. All of those things, right? So let me say this about people that I tend to disagree with, which are more on the Robert Reich, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders side of things. I agree with their intentions. I think that the people that I most vehemently disagree with in terms of economics, I think that they very much genuinely want to help poor people, and I share that intentionality. I think that their methodology is not going to get us there, and that's what I'm fighting them on. But I appreciate that my many friends that support Bernie Sanders are not doing it because they hate America or because they just hate any particular segment. I think they're genuinely moved by injustice, and they're genuinely moved by poverty, and those are both wonderful things for them to have. And I would just ask everybody to keep their mind open to arriving at the place we're all trying to get to. We're all trying to get to a country that is free, fun, safe, and prosperous for everybody.
I can't stand either of you guys. I'm just going to be honest, but I am grateful for the conversation. That's Jim Iuorio. He's host of Futures Edge, Finance Unfiltered, Managing Director at TJM Institutional Services, and my old pal Andrew Heaton, comedian, host of The Political Orphanage, author of Tribalism is Dead. Got a few tee-ups there. Guys,
Tribalism is dumb. It's very much alive. It's tribalism is dumb.
Oh, it's dumb. I just read it wrong. That's the PBR talking. Pardon me. Tribalism is dumb. It is Tribalism is Dumb. Correct. That's the name of the book. You guys were absolutely awesome. So grateful for the last 90 minutes with you both. My very best blessings for you and your family for everything wonderful in 2025. And I hope we could do this again soon. Jim, Andrew, thanks, fellas.
This is fun. Thank you.
Man, oh man. What do you point at, Taylor? What did I miss here? Killer. Wasn't that killer? I said an hour ago, I was like, man, when we clear the guests, we're going to have our little debrief. We're here live and just be like, dude, those two dudes were just absolutely awesome. It's a whiskey night. Which says, fun show, guys. Good to see the FBN HR guy, the Independence call back on his face. No, you're both still on. If you want to come back and answer Widge,
That's not what I didn't get blown away from I wasn't with Fox Business News. I was with the other one.
But I was with Fox
Yes,
Business.
correct,
That was
correct,
the legacy media that I was
correct.
talking about. And this, so like,
Correct.
hi, Widge, long time no see, because that's from a while ago. So my first writing gig, I was a writer on The Independents with Kennedy.
Are we live again? I can't take my shirt off if we're live.
We are live. No, we're live. We're still on. We're still on.
But yeah, Kennedy, Matt Welch, Camille Foster. I worked on that show as their writer at the time. I thought it would be funny as a segment to read hate mail, but most of the hate mail was very poorly written. So I was like, read this on air, but read it verbatim. Like just read it verbatim and say like, just put in all the incredible errors in it, and it will be funny because it'll be mean comments about you, but they'll sound dumb. That was my original idea, and they grabbed me last minute, and they were like, come on, we're gonna pretend that you're the HR director for Fox Business, and you're just gonna pretend to be our human resources guy and read these hate mail segments. And it became this ongoing feature of the show where I would come on as Bernie Max Smith and read these horrible comments about my bosses. And it was very tense because I was reading these awful, I would pick the meanest things I could about them. It would be come on, the cameras wouldn't be rolling, and I'd be like, hey everybody, remember, I'm Andrew Heaton, I'm your friend. I'm your friend. I don't believe any of the stuff that I'm about to tell you. This is stuff that we're doing for the good of the show. They'd be like, yeah. And then I'd read them, and it would just be awkward and tense for about an hour or two. Anyway, Widge, that's a deep cut. I really appreciate that. That's a fun time.
Smart guy. I got to blow, guys. I got to get to the bar.
You get it. Hey, my man, Jet. Wow, what an outro from a guest. Gonna hit it. Heading out to the fucking bar. See you guys when we're out. That's awesome.
Yep, I'm
you
going to do
guys take
something
care.
less fun.
Of
Bye.
course. Andrew's computer's got like 1% battery left. Jim and Andrew, thank you guys. Those dudes absolutely cooked. And you know what's so cool is like, you know, we come in prepped with a decent number of topics and things that like I feel like we know we want to hit. But then also you just need to sit back and like we get two professionals that are just they're kind, they're deliberate, they're smart. They don't back down, but they got like a nice energy. Just kind of like get out of the way and let them take it. And then it's easy, dude, because you and I are like we're all slacking. It's like, oh shit, it's already 7:25. That's awesome. Or it's already 7:45. That's awesome. They crushed it.
Record viewership, near 1,500 viewers, so it was just insane.
Record viewership tonight on the show. Wow. What a sign of things to come. Was that a cha-ching that I heard? Yeah, it absolutely was. That's awesome. So that was very cool. That was a really fun kickoff. And again, today is the first episode that we get exclusive sponsorship with our friends over at Public. And of course, Public sponsors, not just the Say Something Nice segment at the end. That's one of the better ones we've had in a long time. But of course, the entire show. There's the QR code. Head on over to public.com/CT. And Jim and I said this before the show. And Taylor, I was telling you as well, is that, you know, if you're an investor and there are things, you know, and I hear this a lot of time from people at work, people want to learn more, but they're afraid to ask questions. Public has like amazing video tutorials on like options trading, let's say, or you own the underlying asset. You're like, how do I actually buy a covered call? What strike price or expiration do I look for? Whatever it is. And it really walks you through it. And it really explains it. I've sent those on to other people to say, hey, you've asked me these questions before. Public does a great job breaking it down. So we're really excited about the sponsorship, about the partnership with them. And we're ready to rock and roll with the folks over at Public. How are we feeling?
Amazing.
I'm going to follow Jim's lead. I think it's off to the bar.
Must be.
Folks, that's going to do it. My special thanks, of course, to Chris and Alexi, Dan the man himself, Taylor Craig. Happy New Year to you guys. Just an awesome kickoff to way to get things rolling here. And a special thanks to all of you, the thousands and thousands of viewers that we had for tonight's show. Had a blast. We'll be back next Thursday and every Thursday. That's going to do it. And have a good one. We'll see you again soon here on the show.